It was really strong.
Часто.
Старые бланки справок описывали историю болезни одного человека и смерти.
Tonight, we look at 6 disturbing camping encounters caught on camera. Real moments, real danger. Don't forget to subscribe for more terrifying footage like this. Let's begin. The Russian YouTube creator Alex Super, best known for his high-stakes urban exploration series, returned with one of his most dangerous episodes yet. Venturing into a radioactive military bunker hidden deep within Russia's abandoned global Swan nuclear testing zone, often called the Russian Hiroshima. In this installment, Alex and his partner trekked through a remote forest still scarred by the remnants of failed nuclear experiments. Though the area is officially restricted, they pressed on, driven by adrenaline and curiosity.
Смотри, как посветлело-то.
Ты уверен, что нормальная идея была свернуть с бетонки?
Я думаю, да, нормальная идея. Потому что если бетонка вела в другую сторону, а спутниковая карта говорила, что нам нужно в другую сторону, отлично от той и другой стороны,
То
нахрен ту дорогу. Да, я был прав. Осторожно, братан. Мы не знаем, охраняемая ли она здесь, за вторым периметром. Тихо. Лучше не шум. Хуй знает.
табличка.
Чекнем. Опа, какой-то запор. Ну-ка. Запретная зона. Проход закрыт, проезд запрещен.
Ну что, значит мы, считай, добрались до границы.
Ну чё, давай петулю.
Части.
Мокрый и злой. Не пытайтесь этого дома. Ой, повторить.
Сейчас Саня что-то оставит себе на колючке. Ай, блядь!
Надеюсь, ничего я не оставлю. Тебе не советую. Там есть дорога. Вот, да.
На камеру.
Давай.
Мне уже все команды записали. А у меня даже перчаток нет, бро.
Тихо, не... Я дам тебе свои. Нам туда.
Along the way, they encountered decaying warning signs cautioning against radiation and military presence. What they would soon discover went far beyond the usual risks of exploration. After sheltering overnight in a cave, they continued at dawn, following a winding path that led to a ruined military compound. Inside, they unearthed unsettling remnants of the past, handwritten notes, faded codes, and medical documents describing soldiers who suffered acute radiation sickness, some fatally.
Фю Захаров Александр Геннадьевич, 22 года, принимал участие в ликвидации техногенной аварии вблизи ВЧ.
Какой вы?
Что-то там
военной части.
получена доза. Ну,
Че там сколько?
4 с чем-то, все размыто. Смотри, еще одна.
Сейчас, стой.
Это ты прочитай, погоди.
На.
Это протокол заключения медико-клинико-экспертной комиссии.
И что там написано?
Клинический диагноз его сложнее. Больной страдал острой лучевой болезнью, тяжелой степени пульмонит, ожог кожи, кожных покровов, лица. Блин, звуки слова чего-то, я даже не знаю. Наблюдать. Бля, я не могу разобрать.
Ладно, забей.
Решение комиссии. Смертельный исход наступил в связи с обширным поражением внутренних что-то там органов, отек мозга. Вот решение комиссии. Информацию о смерти не разглашать до решения начала.
Ну, глобус они как раз таки не разглашали.
These grim records painted a chilling picture of the sacrifices made during nuclear cleanups long concealed from the public. As they pushed deeper, the tension escalated. They noticed men in uniform nearby. Not fellow explorers, but possibly guards or scavengers. Forced to hide, the pair navigated a labyrinth of tunnels and crumbling bunkers. Gunfire echoed through the underground, adding to the danger as they narrowly avoided being cornered. The facility seemed endless, with corridors giving way to massive chambers filled with relics of the Cold War.
Старые бланки справок описывали историю болезни одного человека и смерти другого. Похоже, эти люди были ликвидаторами, которые устраняли последствия тех неудачных ядерных испытаний. Читать эти строки было жутко. Но интересно. Судя по всему, именно на этой военной базе оставляли пораженных радиацией людей. Так или иначе, им уже не помочь. Но вот кто поможет нам? Чертов бункер был большим. Нет, он был огромным. Комнаты сменялись узкими коридорами, коридоры выводили в огромные залы и по новой. Мы искали другой выход или вент-шахту, чтобы вылезти по ней, но находили кучу всего другого. Под землей было стрёмно. Чего только стоили кости в трубе. Если в пещере все было примерно однообразно, то тут в каждой комнате было что-то свое, а от неожиданных звуков можно было просто обосраться. Причем было ясно, что некоторые из них просто не могут быть изданы человеком. Понятно, что в подобных местах никогда не бывает абсолютно тихо, но блин, что это? Не призраки же в конце-то концов.
Sealed medical files, machinery left untouched, chemical traces, even skeletal remains tucked within pipes. The atmosphere was suffocating, and unexplained noises only heightened the sense of dread. At one point, a heavy steel door slammed shut behind them, nearly trapping them inside. They eventually found a route out, sprinting back through the dense woods, escaping with little more than their footage and a sobering respect for what still lingers underground. Whether staged or genuine, the video captures the raw danger of exploring forgotten nuclear sites. The decaying artifacts and records strongly suggest that parts of Russia's nuclear past remain hidden in plain sight, tucked away in collapsing bunkers where few dare to go. Were Alex and his partner merely lucky to escape a decaying relic of history, or did they brush against secrets still guarded to this day? What might remain sealed beneath those rusting doors? Hold on a sec. If you're enjoying this so far, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Let's continue. The most unsettling video of the night comes from Chase Floyd Inc., a US-based YouTube channel that combines wildlife tracking with cryptid investigations. It was May 2nd, 2020. After a sleepless night marked by strange howls and whooping calls echoing across the mountain ridges, the host headed into the rain-soaked, fog-covered woods to check trail cameras and bait sites. What he captured that morning would become one of his most disturbing experiences yet.
That was it again. Right there, I just heard it again. Okay. Those are audible, unknown sounds that I'm hearing right now that could really be from some kind of Floyd Squatch type creature. Right now, I'm starting to get lightheaded, so I really don't feel good being down here. So I'm just gonna grab, I really don't feel good right now. So I'm just gonna grab the trail camera and get out of here. It's right there. The apple's gone over here too. Okay, I'm starting to get a bit of a headache right now. I really don't feel good. This is freaking me out. Okay, so I'm just gonna grab.
The forest was wet and unnervingly quiet, broken only by repeated echoing calls from the slopes above. As he moved between cameras, the noises seemed to draw closer and grew more erratic. Faint knocking sounds rolled through the ridges like something striking wood. With each step toward his final camera near a tree cave formation,
I feel like I'm gonna fall over. What was that? That was like a growl. Okay. I'm just gonna grab a trail camera and I'm gonna get out of here. I can't. I just heard the growl again. I don't feel good. My head is really starting to hurt.
He became increasingly lightheaded and anxious, convinced something was nearby but unseen.
I don't really feel safe being here. I'm just gonna get out of here. What is that right there? That is definitely some kind of bone. This is the tree cave that we found the... Wow. I mean, that looks... That could be a femur right there. And the smell, too. Oh my God. Oh. Oh my God, it smells really bad. Oh my God. Oh. It smells like a skunk. Some kind of rotting skunk smell. Oh. It was really strong. That was right there. I heard it again.
At the base of the formation, a low growl carried down from the mountain, stopping him in his tracks. He felt dizzy and unsafe, grabbed the last SD card, and prepared to retreat. That's when he noticed what appeared to be a large femur-like bone lying in the brush, its end covered in coarse white hairs. The air was thick with a skunk-like stench so strong it nearly overwhelmed him. All the while, distant howls continued through the fog. Back at home, the recovered footage told two different stories. One card showed only raccoons and crows. The other contained a single disturbing frame, a tall, grass-covered humanoid shape standing among the trees. A sight that turned what should have been a routine wildlife check into an encounter he would never forget. The growls, wood knocks, and odor described here mirror details in other alleged Sasquatch encounters, though skeptics argue they could be misidentified wildlife or hoaxes. Was this simply a coincidence of sounds and smells on a rainy morning, or did the footage actually capture evidence of something undiscovered living in those mountains? Posted to YouTube on June 6, 2021, this video comes from the channel Vanning on Weekends, a creator known for documenting calm and scenic adventures across the countryside in his converted camper truck. His content usually focuses on solitude, nature, and the freedom of van life. But in this episode, things take an unexpectedly unsettling turn. It begins on a warm, clear summer day, with the creator setting out for a remote lake to try his new paddleboard for the first time. The tone is lighthearted and excited as he arrives at a quiet, picturesque spot, prepares his gear, and heads out onto the water.
Hey guys, welcome back to the channel for a new video. We're so good today. It's near 30 degrees Celsius. It's very warm. I think it's the first time that I'm in t-shirt. I'm currently making my way to the north. I'm going to find a little lake there because today I want to try my paddleboard. I just bought it. I never used it. I never tried any paddleboard before. So today is the day. I'm very excited. So direction Siesta Lake. Woo! I just made it to the spot. I'm parked in the middle of the street because the road is under construction, just like that. And the lake looks so nice. It's very beautiful. I just put my bathing suit on. I prepared the bag, the sealed bag, because I don't want nothing to go in the water. And I have the paddleboard here, so I'm gonna inflate it and go on the lake.
Despite being new to the activity, he quickly adapts, balancing against the wind and enjoying the moment. After some time, he returns to shore, ready to find a campsite for the night. Eventually, he settles on a secluded area beneath large power lines, far removed from any main roads. Though isolated, it feels safe, open, quiet, and spacious.
So guys, that's where I'm gonna sleep tonight. I don't think I'm gonna have problems here. It's so big. I'm underneath the power lines. Mosquitoes are starting to pop out right now. It's crazy. Okay, so let's eat. I'm so hungry. First thing first, a little treatment. Go away! I just cooked this at home before leaving, and turns out it's still hot, so I'm just gonna eat it like this. No need to heat it. So it's rice mixed with some quinoa and some potatoes with some red beans and a little bit of green peas. I was searching for that Valentina, but I think I brought it home. It feels so good to eat.
He sets up camp and begins cooking a simple meal of rice, potatoes, quinoa, and beans he had prepared earlier. But just as he begins to eat, the atmosphere abruptly changes. Gunshots ring out in the distance, not one, but several blasts echoing across the trees. The sounds appear to come from a group of people firing near one of the massive pylons. Though they aren't especially close, the clarity of the noise through the open space is unnerving. What had felt like a safe and solitary night now takes on a precarious tone. Despite the unease, he continues his evening.
So right now I think I'm on public land. It's Hydro-Québec electrical line, I believe. Someone just shot something. Whoa. Okay. Lots of shots. I don't know if you can see, but the people that are shooting with their guns, they're just underneath the big pylon over there. They're very far and I can hear the blast of the explosion. It's very nice. It's crazy.
Building a fire and reflecting on how unusual it felt to hear gunfire in such a remote place. The night ends quietly, the flames crackling while distant wildlife sounds play against the backdrop of lingering tension.
That's something I love, just sitting by the fire and hearing those animals.
By morning, the mood shifts again, lightening as he prepares breakfast and considers the challenges of summer van life. From a viewer's perspective, the most striking element isn't confrontation, it's the atmosphere. The sudden intrusion of gunfire into a calm night outdoors highlights just how quickly isolation can feel threatening. Whether those shots were harmless target practice or something more concerning, the uncertainty was enough to shift the entire tone of the experience. So what do you think? Were these sounds nothing more than distant recreation, or could there have been something more troubling happening beneath those power lines? Madison Blagden, an experienced long-distance hiker and content creator, has logged countless miles documenting trips across some of the most remote trails in the United States. On her 2025 return to the Appalachian Trail, she encountered something that unsettled her far more than any previous challenge. The day started normally. After a restful night indoors and some editing, Madison set out before dawn, determined to be back on trail by 8. A chance ride from a kind stranger named Andre cut her walk short and lifted her spirits.
Dude, the trail provides! I woke up early this morning, was so productive. I had video stuff to do, writing stuff to do. I did a ton last night, but I just didn't have it in me to do everything. I was so tired, but got up early, did it all, and I told myself, gotta leave the room before 7:30. I want to be back on trail by 8, and it's like a 30-minute walk because it's a little over a mile. Probably would have been less, but just for shits and gigs, I stuck my thumb out and got picked up by this guy named Andre so quickly. He was just so ridiculously nice. So he just saved me 20-25 minutes of walking down this road to get back to the trail. So now I'm back, baby. Great night last night. It was so amazing just getting a room and catching up on sleep and being comfortable. And yeah, dude, I can feel it. I feel energy is good. I think all of this change was exactly what I needed. So this is gonna be a magical week, I can just tell, man.
She felt rested, energized, and confident the week ahead would be great. Her positive mood held through the morning. She entered Vermont, her 14th state on the through hike, and ran into fellow hiker Sunflower. Small acts of kindness from the trail community followed. People went out of their way to try to recover a lost pendant for her, and a familiar trail angel nicknamed Iceman shared food and conversation that fueled her for the day's climb. Everything pointed to a successful day.
Update, just met Iceman. Had such an amazing lunch with him. Hot dogs and coleslaw and all this stuff, and potato salad, Mountain Dew. Texas sheet cake, baby. So good. It's always so nice to see him. He's just like the nicest person ever. He's a delight. And that got me fueled up. Now I'm in the process of doing this big climb. It's pretty much a 10-mile climb up from that road. But it's like the steepest to start, and then like it's kind of gradual that I remember the rest of the way. So this will take me to a fire tower and shelter, and then I'll have, I don't know, 4 or something miles to go past there to the next shelter. Just trying to set myself up for like a 26-mile day tomorrow, so I can go into this into Manchester and have like a half day, be done by 3 p.m. would be amazing.
After leaving Iceman, Madison began a steep 10-mile ascent that would take her past a fire tower toward a shelter. About a mile from the road, she cut onto a short spur to use the privy and noticed a man in bright orange near the shelter. At first, she assumed he might be a hunter signaling a warning, but as she moved closer, the situation felt wrong. The man's posture and behavior were odd. Rather than greeting or moving on, he watched her in silence and made a strange hand motion.
So pretty much, things were just amazing. I had lunch with Iceman. I hiked in. I got a mile or so up from the highway, and there was a shelter, and I thought I might stop off and see if the shelter had a privy. You could basically see, I could see some frame of the shelter from the trail, but it was just off trail. So I start walking up the side trail, and as I get close, I notice that there's someone there wearing some orange, and they put their hand up, signaling something to me. My first thought is they're a hunter. They might be telling me that they don't want me there or to move, or that I don't know. They were signaling something with their hand, and then I realized they had were open hand telling me to come to them, and I took my headphones out. I couldn't hear. I just wasn't expecting to see someone. I wasn't expecting any kind of interaction, so I was confused. I was caught off guard, and then all of a sudden they were like, "Hey, come here, I need to talk to you." I was like, "What are you talking about?" And I didn't get close. I was probably 20 or 30 feet away, enough that I could see them, give a rough description of them, but I wasn't very close to them.
Not a normal wave, but an invitation. When he called to her and said things that didn't make sense, claiming someone was trying to poison him and asking for help, alarm bells rang. Madison kept her distance, stepped back toward the main trail, and then ran. Panic set in. She sprinted through the forest, every twig and shadow amplified by adrenaline. She later said she had never felt so afraid on trail. Madison didn't stop for about a mile and a half, finally pausing only to record a breathless update while glancing over her shoulder.
Once they started saying stuff to me, I kind of stopped getting closer to them. And then they said a couple other things. One of them being, "Hey, come here. I need help. Someone's trying to poison me. Come here, come here." And I heard that. I know no one's behind me, but dude, I just keep looking. That's where I'm at right now mentally. When they said that, I turned and ran for my friggin' life. And I only looked over my shoulder once, just roughly to see, are they chasing me? Because as I ran, they were screaming, "Come back here, don't go, come back," and other stuff like that, which is friggin' terrifying, actually. Oh my gosh, my adrenaline is spiking just talking about it. And I'm climbing a mountain right now. And back there, it's I was climbing a mountain at that time. It's a 10-mile climb up from the road. So I run down the spur trail to get back to the trail. I'm kind of smart. I actually cut into the woods sooner in hopes that if they didn't stand up right away, they wouldn't be able to tell if I had gone north or south. So I was hoping maybe they think I went back to the road, like the highway. Maybe they don't know that I went into the woods.
In those moments, the sense of being pursued and the man's desperate, confusing shouts for her to return made the situation terrifying. Once the adrenaline subsided, she gave a calmer account. The man had not physically attacked her or chased after her, but his vacant stare, the odd gesture, and the isolated shelter all combined to make the encounter feel unsafe.
So I called my dad, gave him a rundown of my location, where that had happened, where I'm headed and everything like that. So he can call the police at some point. He already did. He did file a police report. And the police, shocker, don't think anyone is going to be sent into the shelter to investigate, which is crazy because yeah, the guy didn't chase me. So he probably wasn't trying to assault me or hurt me, because if he had wanted to, he could have, because I'm in the woods and I'm alone. But he's clearly some kind of mentally ill. He's having some kind of a breakdown, or he's on drugs because he thinks someone's trying to poison him. So that's kind of like a red flag. So I talked to my dad, went back and forth. I wound up getting like 2 miles away from there. Then all of a sudden, I hear something behind me, turn around, and I'm relieved to see a pretty young guy. He looks quite different than the man did, wearing running gear like he had run in from the trailhead. I yelled over to him and I kind of freaked him out, but I was like, hey dude, like, I don't want to freak you out, but like, I've been running from someone for the last half hour. I'm very freaked out, like, you just scared me. And he was very nice and was like, is it okay if I walk closer to you so we can talk? And I explained to him what had happened, and yeah, he was a nice guy. He wasn't going.
She called her father, shared her location, and asked him to notify authorities. A police report was filed, though no immediate shelter search was conducted. After putting distance between herself and the spot, Madison ran into another hiker in running gear who had come up from the trailhead. Relieved to find another person, she accepted the small comfort of company. The event left her shaken, exhausted, and physically ill from the stress. A stark reminder that danger on the trail sometimes comes from other people rather than wildlife or weather. The episode reads as an encounter with someone likely unstable or impaired rather than a premeditated attacker. Madison's decision to keep distance, run, document what happened, and notify family and police were prudent. Situationally appropriate safety responses that probably prevented escalation. Was this a distressed person in need of help? Or someone deliberately trying to unsettle a solo hiker? What would you have done in her place? On May 5th, 2024, TikTok creator Coco Bear Hikes uploaded a video documenting his through hike along the Appalachian Trail. During the trek, he suddenly picked up the sound of gunfire echoing through the woods, despite being in what seemed like the middle of nowhere. Although there was nothing overtly paranormal about it, the situation was unsettling. Unarmed and unsure of what was happening, he decided to begin filming for his own safety.
There it goes again. It's gonna be 4. And so it's like a really weird place to shoot. I think the trail goes that way. It's like, maybe it's just me being paranoid, but I have like a weird feeling. It's like, why the fuck are you shooting right on the trail? Only 4 shots. Maybe you only have a 4-shot gun. You're moving. So it's not. I'm just like sketched out, you know, like a little weirded out.
The video captures the uneasy atmosphere as the shots ring out close to the trail. Viewers quickly chimed in with their own takes. Some argued he had every reason to feel alarmed, while others dismissed it as typical activity in rural Appalachia. Still, considering the region's long history of mysterious and unsettling stories, the moment only heightened his sense of unease. Encounters like this raise questions about the unpredictable dangers hikers can face in remote stretches of Appalachia, whether from wildlife, hidden communities, or simply reckless behavior. Was this just an ordinary case of hunters in the woods, or could something more sinister have been unfolding just off the trail? This next unsettling clip comes from the Action Adventure Twins, a channel known for cave diving and locating hidden, unmarked caves. While exploring the Appalachian Mountains, they discovered a small opening in the ground and decided to lower a GoPro on a rope to see if it connected to a larger cave system. What the camera recorded, however, was far from ordinary.
Maybe this is like a well casing or something. Maybe that just fell off down there, but I don't know. Let's we got a brighter flashlight. Let's see what we can see. All right, sending it. Oh, it's going there.
In the footage, faint sounds resembling footsteps can be heard circling the device, along with heavy breathing picked up by the microphone. The unsettling noises left them unsure of what exactly they had captured. They later reviewed the footage at home and shared it online, noting their plans to return with upgraded equipment for a closer investigation. Some believe the sounds could have been from animals or shifting rock, while others argue it seemed disturbingly human. If there really is someone, or something, moving beneath the Appalachians, what might the twins uncover on their next descent? That's all for tonight's video. Which encounter gave you chills? Let us know in the comments below. Got your own experience? We want to hear it. And whatever you do, don't miss what's coming next.